YouTube, it's Tone back with another one for you. And so this one here today is a continuation of Meet Your Strawman. Awesome fucking book. And let's get right into this shit. This is like, what is it? Got about 9 slides here, so let's go ahead and get right into this shit. So, toward the end of World War II, when it became obvious that the Allies were going to win and dictate the post-war environment, the major world economic powers met at Bretton Woods, a luxury resort in New Hampshire, in July 1944 and hammered out the Bretton Woods Agreement for international finance. The British pound lost its position as the global trade and reserve currency, and its place was taken by the US dollar. Part of the price demanded by Roosevelt in exchange for the U.S. entry into the war. So some deal that they worked out for U.S. soldiers in some war or some shit, right? They're always selling somebody out for something. So without the economic advantage of being the world's central currency, Britain was forced to nationalize the Bank of England in 1946. The Bretton Woods Agreement was ratified in 1945, and in addition to making the U.S. dollar the global reserve currency and trade currency, obliged the signatory nations to tie their currencies to the dollar, right? So the U.S. dollar has been the fucking reserve currency for quite a while, and nobody noticed that's changed in the last couple of years. They they fucking removed the U.S. dollar as the world fucking reserve dollar, which is an obvious sign that that the contracts were up, right? So they're losing their power and shit based on the dollar. So the nations which ratified Bretton Woods did so on two conditions. The first was that the Federal Reserve would refrain from overprinting the dollar as a means to loot real products and produce from their nations in exchange for ink and paper. Because that's all the money is. It's fucking paper. You know what I mean? Health is wealth. Money is just paper. Basically an imperial tax. The assurance was backed up by the second, which was the U.S. dollar would always be convertible to gold at $35 per ounce. Of course, the Federal Reserve, being a private bank and not answerable to the U.S. government, did start overprinting paper dollars, as much of the perceived prosperity of the 1950s and 60s was a result of foreign nations' obligations to accept the paper notes as being worth gold at the rate of $35 an ounce. So essentially that's what started people from even fucking taking the money to fucking begin with. And then now they kind of just force people to fucking take it. That's how that works. So then in 1970, France looked at the huge pile of paper notes sitting in their vaults, for which real French products like wine, cheese had been traded, and notified the United States government that they would exercise their option under Bretton Woods to return the paper notes for gold at $35 per ounce exchange rate. Of course, the United States had nowhere near the gold to redeem the paper notes, so on August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon temporarily suspended the gold convertibility of the U.S. Federal Reserve notes. Temporarily, my ass. So this Nixon Shock effectively ended Bretton Woods, and many global currencies started to disengage from the U.S. dollar. Worse still, since the United States had collateralized their loans with the nation's gold reserves, it quickly became apparent that the U.S. government did not in fact have enough gold to cover its outstanding debts. And I mean, gold is a whole nother story. I'm not even going to get into that, but it's not what you think it is. Nothing is in this fucking nothing is in this fucking world, man. So foreign nations began to get nervous about their loans to the U.S. Understandably, were reluctant to lend any additional money to the United States without some form of collateral. So Richard Nixon started the environmental movement with the EPA and its various programs, such as wilderness zones, roadless areas, heritage rivers, wetlands, all of which took vast areas of public lands and made them off limits to the American people, who were technically the owners of those lands. But Nixon had little concern for the environment, for the real purpose of this land grab under the guise of the environment was to pledge those pristine lands and their vast mineral resources and collateral on the national debt. The plethora of different programs was simply to conceal the true scale of how much American land was being pledged to foreigners, to foreign lenders as collateral of the government's debts, eventually almost 25% of the nation itself. And what's interesting about that is that they're fucking pledging land that doesn't even fucking belong to them. So I don't know who the fuck's thinking that they're gonna come over here and take that shit, but I wish a nigga would. I'll put it like that. I'll put it like that. So with open land, you know what I'm saying? That's like Walmart putting your ass on the line for some deal that they made. Yeah, right, bro. Try again. So with open lands for collateral already in short supply, the U.S. government embarked on a new program to shore up sagging and international demand for the dollar. The United States approached the world's oil-producing nations, mostly in the Middle East, and offered them a deal. In exchange for only selling their oil for dollars, the United States would guarantee the military safety of those oil-rich nations. The oil-rich nations would agree to spend and invest their U.S. paper dollars inside the United States, in particular in U.S. Treasury bonds, redeemable through future generations of U.S. taxpayers. And so look at what the USC, United States Code definition of taxpayer is. It's not you and it's not me. All right. So the concept was labeled the petrodollar. And in fact, the U.S. no longer able to back the dollar with gold was now backing it with oil, other people's oil, and the necessity to control those oil nations in order to prop up the dollar has shaped Americans' foreign policy in the region ever since. But as America's manufacturing and agriculture has declined, the oil-producing nations faced a dilemma. Those piles of U.S. Federal Reserve notes were not able to purchase much from the United States because the United States had little other than real estate which anyone wanted to buy, right? So this is probably when they start to get into human trafficking and shit like that, because, you know, I mean, people are the real value here. You know what I'm saying? Without the people, what is anything worth? For people are the ones that give everything value. You know what I'm saying? So think about that. So Europe's cars and aircraft were superior and less costly, while experiments with GMO food crops led to nations refusing to buy U.S. food exports. Israel's constant belligerence against its neighbors caused them to wonder if the U.S. could actually keep up their end of the petrodollar arrangement. Oil-producing nations started to talk of selling their oil for whatever currency the purchasers chose to use. Iraq, already hostile, and the United States, following Desert Storm, demanded the right to sell their oil for euros in 2000, and the United Nations agreed to allow it in 2002 under the Oil for Food program instituted following Desert Storm. 1 year later, the United States reinvaded Iraq, lynched Saddam Hussein. I mean, all that shit. Yo, all these motherfuckers are actors, just so you know. So they didn't lynch fucking Saddam nothing, and placed Iraq's oil back on the world market only for U.S. dollars. Following 9/11, the U.S. policy shifted away from being an impartial broker of peace in the Middle East to one of unquestioned support for Israel's aggressions, only further eroded confidence in the petrodollar deal, and even more oil-producing nations started openly talking of oil trade for other global currencies. So I mean, you know, I'm reading this book to you, and some of it is true, but not so much about the people dying and shit. And you know, there's always some truth in the lies, so you have to be able to discern between the difference. So you can fucking deduce a lot of the truth from this shit when you subtract anything that doesn't really fucking fit. You know what I mean? So over in Libya, Gaddafi had instituted a state-owned central bank and a value-based trade currency, the gold dinar. Gaddafi announced that Libya's oil was for sale, but only for the gold dinar. Other African nations, seeing the rise of the gold dinar and the euro, even as the U.S. dollar continued its inflation-driven decline, flocked to the new Libyan currency for trade. This move had the potential to seriously undermine the global hegemony of the dollar. So French President Nicolas went so far as to call Libya a threat to the financial security of the world. And it's crazy how they could even call one person a fucking threat. Oh, really? You guys really think the fucking one dude? You think the fucking Bill Gates is the one fucking behind all this shit? Some skinny fucking geek motherfucker is really the one that's trying to... Man, come on. Cut it the fuck out. They do that shit. It's a fucking group of people, and they just put some fucking asshole as the fucking scapegoat. So when shit gets real, they could act like they took him out. Oh, we took out the one guy who was doing all this. Oh, really? One fucking skinny geek-ass motherfucker's doing all this? I highly doubt that. Highly, highly, highly doubt that. The fuck out of here with that shit. So the United States invaded Libya, brutally murdered Gaddafi, supposedly. I highly doubt that happened. They're all fucking actors. They put all their actors over there on the front stage, fucking pretending to be these powerful fucking people. When in all reality, if you ever played a game of chess, you're not putting your king or your queen out on the front line to get fucking smoked like that. It doesn't work like that. That wouldn't even make sense. So, imposed a private central bank and returned Libya's oil output to dollars only. The gold that was to have been made into the gold dinars is, as of last report, unaccounted for. According to General Wesley Clark, the master plan for the dollarification of the world's oil nations included 7 targets: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. So these are all places that they're trying to get their central banks in and shit like that, and they end up going to war with them to try to get their little banks in there and shit, right? Because they didn't need the fucking banks because they had oil, so they already had their leverage. You know what I mean? So, which dared to sell their oil to China for the yuan is a late 8th edition. What is notable about the original 7 nations originally targeted by the U.S. is that none of them are members of the Bank for International Settlements, and that's what I'm talking about. So the private central bank is private central bank located in Switzerland. This meant that the nations were deciding for themselves how to run their nation's economies rather than submit to the private international banks. That's what it really all comes the fuck down to, is that, you know, they had this little global plan to try to get all their fucking banks into every single country. The ones that didn't want to be part of their banking system, because all they do is print money out of fucking thin air. So then they end up finding a way to fucking invade them and shit like that. When in all reality, all they're doing, they're not even really doing that, because they're not allowed to fucking do that. They put on a show like they're fucking invading these people, and really they're just putting actors on the stage to pretend to get invaded. Have little cameras out there putting on fucking fake ass shows. When anybody that's been in some real shit in the streets, you know nobody has their cameras out in the middle of a shootout. It doesn't work like that. But these motherfuckers are gonna show you all this footage of fucking war happening, man. The fuck out of here with that. Now the bankers' gun sights are on Iran, which dares to have a government-controlled central bank and sell their oil for whatever currency that they choose. The war agenda is, as always, to force Iran's oil to be sold only for dollars and to force them to accept privately owned central bank. The German government just recently asked for the return of some of their gold bullion from the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve. France said it will take up to 5 years to return Germany's gold. The United States has said they will need 8 years to return Germany's gold. This suggests strongly that the Bank of France and New York Federal Reserve have used the deposited gold for other purposes, and they are scrambling to find new gold to cover the shortfall and prevent a gold run. So France suddenly invades Mali to combat Al Qaeda, which is all fake, man. There's no fucking terrorists like that, with the U.S. joining in. If there's any terrorists, it's them fucking creating a terrorist. But by nature, as a whole, humans are fucking good people, and without the cops, everything would still be fucking fine. We really don't need them. So Mali just happens to be one of the world's largest producers of gold, with gold accounting for 80% of Mali's exports. War for the bankers does not get more obvious than that. Americans have been raised by a public school system and media that constantly assures them that the reasons for all these wars and assassinations are many and varied. The U.S. claims to bring democracy to conquered lands, and they haven't. The usual result of a U.S. overthrow is the imposition of a dictatorship, such as the 1953 CIA overthrow of Iran's democratically elected government of Mohammed, and the imposition of Shah, or the 1973 CIA overthrow of Chile's democratically elected government of President Salvador, and the imposition of Augusto, or to save a people from a cruel oppressor, revenge for 9/11, or that tired, worn out catch-all excuse for invasions with weapons of mass destruction, right? Yeah, right, bro. Assassinations are always passed off as the crazed lone nuts to obscure the real agenda. And that's what it is. So they'll fucking sell the invasion as some type of, justified reason, and they'll just fucking create a reason. The dude that came up with the weapons of mass destruction and supposedly said that was the reason why they went over there, he magically ended up fucking disappearing, and now there's nobody to blame. And this is what they do. Come on. Fuck out of here. How about the people that actually physically went and did that? Why don't you hold them fucking accountable? Because it don't matter what the fuck and who says what. You guys are all accountable for your fucking actions. It don't matter what the fuck, who said what and what the fuck that you thought, at the end of the day, you're going to have to be liable for all of your actions the same way that everybody else is, right? What's good for the goose is good for the fucking gander, buddy. So the real agenda is simple. It is enslavement of the people by the creation of a false sense of obligation. And I mean, patriotism and all that shit too is the same fucking thing. That shit is all the fucking mind control shit too. Because in all reality, you don't even know where the fuck that you're even from. Everybody's been shuffled around so fucking much. They got black people thinking that they fucking came here from Africa and shit. Man, get the fuck out of here. Black people and Indians, bro. Fuck out of here. So they got this patriotism shit just so people want to fight to fucking defend the land that ain't even theirs. You don't even know where the fuck you guys are even from. That obligation is false because the private central banking system by design always creates more debt than money with which to repay that debt. Private central banking is not science. It is a religion, a set of arbitrary rules created to benefit the priesthood, meaning the owners of the private central bank. And that's exactly what it is. And it is a fucking religion because you believe that it's worth something because you choose to believe that, not because there's really nothing to back it up other than your fucking belief that shit is valuable. But in all reality, it's just paper and ink. Think about it. The fraud persists with often lethal results because the people are tricked into believing that this is the way of life, that life is supposed to be, and no alternative exists or should be dreamed of. The same was true of the two earlier systems of enslavement, ruled by divine right, and slavery, both of which are systems designed to trick people into obedience, and both of which are now recognized by modern civilizations as illegitimate. Now we are entering into a time in human history where we will recognize that rule by debt or rule by private central bankers issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is equally illegitimate. And it is. It only works as long as the people allow themselves to believe that this is the way life is supposed to be. But understand this, above all else, private central banks do not exist to serve people, the community, or the nation. Private central banks exist to serve their owners, to make them rich beyond the dreams of Midas, and all for the cost of paper and ink, the right to bribe to the right official. And that's all that it is paper and ink. Same thing with the Bible. You know what I'm saying? You guys find it really fucking valuable. There's some good shit in there, but for the most part, that shit's been tainted to the point where it's fucking magic spells that you put on yourself every time you read that shit. That's why you can feel the Holy Spirit when you read it. You're fucking putting a spell on yourself. Use your fucking heads. Behind all these wars and all these fucking fake assassinations, the 100 million horrible deaths from all the wars lies in a single policy of dictatorship. The private central bankers allow rulers to rule only on the condition that the people of the nation remain as slaves to the private central banks. Failing that, any ruler will be killed and their nation invaded by those other nations which are already enslaved to the private central banks. And the shit is all theater, just so you know. The shit is all theater. The so-called class of civilizations we read about on the corporate media is really a war between banking systems, with the private central bankers forcing themselves onto the rest of the world, no matter how many millions must die for it. Indeed, the constant hate mongering against Muslim lies in a simple fact. Like the ancient Christians prior to the Knights Templar private banking system, Muslims forbid usury, the lending of money at interest. And that is the reason why the American government and media insist that Muslims must be converted or killed. They refuse to submit to currencies issued at interest. They refuse to be the debt slaves. So off to war American children must go to spill their blood for the gold of the American money junkies. We barely survived the last two world wars, and the nuclear bioweapon age are the private central bankers willing to risk incinerating the whole planet just to feed their greed. Apparently so. Okay. Okay, so this is the last slide here. So flag waving and propaganda aside, all modern wars are wars by and for the private bankers, fought and bled for by the third parties, unaware of the true reason why they are expected to be crippled and killed. The process is quite simple. And so, you know, when people come back from these wars and they're all fucked up and shit, well, what the fuck did you expect? First of all, you signed up for that shit because nobody's been, you motherfuckers did not get drafted. So when you come back and you're missing an arm or a fucking limb, you know, what the fuck did you expect, bro? You signed up for that. So the process is quite simple. As soon as the private central bank is, and I mean, if you're fighting for the freedom of the U.S., why the fuck would it be on somebody else's soil? I can understand if it's fucking domestic terrorists like we have today here on this fucking land. Domestic terrorists is one thing. Why don't you fucking fight a war over here, bro? Do that. Fucking retards. So as soon as as the private central bank issues its currency as a loan at interest, the public is forced deeper and deeper into debt. When the people are reluctant to borrow anymore, that is when the Keynesian economists demand government borrow more to keep the pyramid scheme working. When both the people and government refuse to borrow anymore, that is when the war starts to plunge everyone deeper into debt to pay for war, then after the war to borrow more to rebuild. When the war is over, the people have about the same as they did before the war, except the graveyards are far larger and everyone is in debt to the private bankers for the next century. This is why Brown